responsible for trade shows, both running them and attending them at my previous company. Wow, what is going to be happening now that we've been through this last 18 months? And so we have three presenters headed up by Dr. Gary Lilien, and they're going to talk to us about that. They've got a really interesting presentation. Dr. Lillian's going to put this up. So Gary is going to head this up. I'm going to introduce the other two speakers first, and then I'll talk about Dr. Lilien. So joining him is Srinath Gopalakrishna, and he is professor of marketing, the David and Judy O'Neill MBA professor and faculty director of the executive MBA and department chair of marketing at the Robert J. Trusletsky College of Business at the University of Missouri, Columbia. He's a dedicated scholar with a focus on business-to-business marketing and sales management. Specifically, his research has examined the integration of marketing communication elements, measuring the economic returns from marketing expenditures, analyzing sales motivation incentive programs, and assessing the drivers of intermediate and overall sales outcomes. Don't we have lots of questions for him? I can't wait to have him up. He also serves on the editorial review board for the Journal of Marketing, the Journal of B2B Marketing, and the Journal of Personal Selling and Sales Management. Srinath has been the recipient of the college's Distinguished Research Fellowship Award, the O'Brien Award for Teaching Excellence, and University William T. Kemper Fellowship for Teaching Excellence. He's taught several of the study abroad programs, and he's consulted with a lot of industry partners on research and teaching, and we look forward to his insights. Joining him is Lilien Seqeria. Ian is the VP Data Solutions Freeman. He has 35 plus years of experience in trade shows and the event industry. He's been working with exhibit organizers, exhibitors, brand marketers, and all the associated folks to help develop their measurement programs and performance metrics. Ian serves as a consultant on key corporate and show organizer accounts. He's a regular speaker at industry conferences, and he's a faculty member at Exhibitor Live's annual conference for over 25 years. As recent past chair of CEIR, the Center for Exhibition Industry Research, Ian is very involved in guiding industry research. In December 2018, Ian was awarded the IAE's Distinguished Services Award. He has a BS in economics from Allegheny College in Pennsylvania. Those of us from Pittsburgh know where you are, and an MBA from American University in Washington, D.C. He has a wealth of knowledge in his head about trade shows, and I'm really looking forward to his insights here as well. So heading up this threesome is Dr. Gary Lilien. Dr. Lilien is the Distinguished Research Professor of Management Science and a former chairman of the Management Science Department at Penn State. He's also co-founder of ISBM and our former research director. Gary is the author of and co-author of more than 20 books and over 120 professional articles, primarily in areas of industrial marketing, new product development, marketing models, and bargaining theory. Dr. Lillien's research interests are in market decision support, market engineering, market segmentation, new product modeling, and marketing mix issues for business. Gary has traveled to all continents, as I understand it, and at every continent, he has found at least one good wine. Last night, I think he found at least one good beer. So we're very grateful that he joins us, and so looking forward to this team. So thank you, all three of you, and I'm going to pass it over to Gary.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I had a little bit of tech problem. Anyway, thank you so much for that. And Lynn, I do have to say that I did not find any outstanding wines in Antarctica.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But otherwise, I was 6 for 7. Anyway, it's a pleasure to join you today, and pleasure to share what we know about the ROI of trade shows, etc. Lynn has introduced the team. I'll say a little bit more about both Srinath and Ian as we go along. And you see there'll be a cameo by Paul Barron. I'll say a few words about that in a few minutes. Most of you know what a trade show is, a trade fairs. They've really been around since the Middle Ages. So for example, here's a well-known cited show. This was the Champagne, was in the county of Champagne in France, a trade fair. Was very popular during the 12th and 13th century. It lasted about 2 to 3 weeks, where people would bring all of their wares together, etc. You see an awful lot of clothing and things like that there. Well, that's transformed into something that looks like this today. So most of us are familiar with this. Trade shows or trade fairs are where a group of sellers or exhibitors come together to convene, to attract, and to show products and offerings to prospective buyers who are the attendees. These shows come about in a number of different ways. Sellers can organize them themselves. Most of us belong to trade associations, which may organize a show, etc., or some kind of an independent trade show organizer, or somebody who runs a big exhibit hall has an incentive to try to manage what we call the two-sided market. Two-sided market because you need both the buyers and the sellers anticipating that the other one is going to be there before they get together. These are also called platforms. Shows come in many different sizes and shapes. Some are regional, others are national, and some are global. Some are narrow or vertical, such as the operating room nurses show, and others are broad or horizontal. Most of you probably recall Comdex, which is now CES, or the Consumer Electronics Show. And as I say, the dynamic game being played is to exhibit or not to exhibit on the exhibitor side, and then on the attendee, to attend and not to attend. If the exhibitors think there are going to be no attendees, they don't exhibit. And if the attendees don't think there are be a lot of exhibitors, they won't decide to come. The ROI, which we mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, is complicated, especially prospectively. There are a lot of top goals for exhibitors, but they've not pretty much stayed the same over the years. Many exhibitors look at shows to do lead generation and measure the number of leads, the quality of leads, the number of leads that lead to sales. Actually making sales at the show, market testing for new products. There's always networking, and we'll say a few words about that. And brand building, basically showing up, showing yourself off there. For attendees, many come to actually make purchases. Some of them do for future needs. That is taking a look at what's coming on down the pike. Some have got specific business problems they're looking for solutions for. Some attend meetings. In many shows, there is actually a formal education, a certification process that goes on. And of course, there's networking once again. Most of you probably attended at least one trade show in person, either as an exhibitor or an attendee in 2019. I doubt most of you attended any show in person in 2020 or this year so far, for obvious reasons. COVID only accelerated a trend that had been going on for years. Now, as developers in digital technology offered alternative ways to achieve the goals, both for exhibitors and attendees. But COVID forced a natural experiment. What if we could attend or meet face-to-face? What would we do? Lynn's already introduced Ian and Srinath. They're two of my close colleagues, and they're going to provide perspectives on the past, present, and most importantly, on the future, both near and far, and the role of trade shows in the B2B marketing mix. We all want the session to be highly interactive, and I'll act as moderator. I may choose to interrupt the speaker with questions. Please put them in the chat. I'll monitor that as we go through. Lynn indicated that, really, as I say, she's already introduced the speakers. When we met with her on Monday, I asked how long we had known each other. I think Ian piped on, it's been more than 3 decades. I was a little skeptical about that. But I took a look at this article. Do trade shows pay off? By the way, you can have a copy of that. Send me an email. I'll send you a copy of it. It's a little dated, but I reread it, and it actually makes great sense today. It showed up in our top journal, the Journal of Marketing, in July of 1995. Now, as we know, many of you know, it takes several years for an article to get put together. And for the research to be done and go through multiple reviews. So this at least is evidence that that Ian's 3 years is quite credible. I wanted to show this article for another reason. And it turns out that, how did this come about, this article? It turns out that at a meeting like this, I was chatting with Don McCandless, who was director of marketing at Restec, an ISBM firm at the time, member firm. They manufacture glass chromatography. And during a face-to-face version of what we did yesterday, we used to call remember we used to call those a networking reception? Remember those things? So I asked him what kept him up at night. And he said, after a little bit of maybe one or two shots of beer, sips of beer, et cetera, he said, calculating the ROI of a trade show. And he said, we're participating in a trade show and my CFO is giving me all kinds of grief about whether it's justified. So it turns out that industry, that kind of industry interaction, and Don was extremely helpful in both, basically it was mutually beneficial because he got the answer to the question that he needed and we got an academic paper out of it. And that's very much along the lines of what Stefan was talking about earlier. So you notice that Ian is on this paper, so we have academics and practitioners on the paper as well. Let me just see. Okay, so before we move on, I'm going to I'd like us to hear from Paul Barron. He's a food and restaurant pundit and a director of the Foodable Networks. He's going to be commenting about the National Restaurant Show, traditionally held in the McCormick Center in Chicago. The 2019 show was 4 days, had 2,300 exhibitors and over 42,000 attendees. So we'll hear a little bit from him before we pass things on.
The event industry is in shambles, and the biggest fish in the pond just declared that they're canceling their show for this year. My name is Paul Barron. This is the Barron Report. The National Restaurant Association, which has recently sold their, I shouldn't say sold, leased their show out to Winsight, which is an organization that runs restaurant business, has now canceled their National Restaurant Show for the second year in a row, obviously due to, the issue is when we look at where this is going, a lot has really kind of happened. And if you look at what's happening around the industry, pretty much from a standpoint of any in-person event, these have all been kind of blown away. So here's a breakdown from Reed Exhibitions, which is one of the biggest show organizers out there globally, on really kind of the changing event industry. And if you look at some of the forward indicators that they are reporting on and really kind of looked at, one is this in certain times lead to new behaviors. This is one that I really thought when I pulled the deck together and I wanted to look at, really analyze what they were talking about. This is one where basically what I highlighted there says, this is clearly reflected behaviors in our exhibitors and visitors. 84% of visitors and exhibitors have tried at least one digital service since the lockdown. These findings support Kantar's March 20th report on new consumer behaviors, which 84% said they would try at least one new service. And this is all related to utilizing different kinds of platforms, messaging platforms, streaming services, live broadcasts via phone, social, gaming, very, very low. Shopping, I thought was interesting. Online learning is one of the bigger ones, obviously being more education. And then banking services was another one that was looked, and then teleconferences and food delivery. All those kinds of aspects have been affected when you look at how the industry is trying to adapt to this. Of course, this being a European report, but has a lot of indicators from a global perspective on how the industry is going to be dealing with this, especially on the point that we need to be looking at in this, and that is, will people return to trade shows? And I think based on when we look at the psychological effect, the slow uptake in people interested in going back, I feel like this is probably going to change the way we do trade shows in the coming years, maybe forever. One thing you cannot replace with virtual is that peer-to-peer networking. But I do think there is a solution for that we just have to reassess our industry and maybe relook at how we're going to do that. But if 56% would attend digital talks and education sessions, which is huge, that's a big number. on that. And then connecting with suppliers, 52% said they would do that via digital format as well. And then connect with specific individuals and companies, 47% there. Digitally augmented events are here to stay. If you notice here, 65% of visitors and 57% of exhibitors believe digital will continue to work, for events post this event. Contactless technology is going to be huge in how it's going to be dealt with. Business cards are gone. Digital on everything in terms of the physical badge. All of these kinds of things interact with a different way to operate an event floor and also a trade show. Yes, going to a regional and more localized, potentially exclusive program. So I think this is something that is really going to be a big opportunity. I want to kind of break these down. Adding value-added services, outsourcing your work, pay attention to the contracts. That's going to be a big one, of course, if you're doing anything in the events industry. You guys know that, but you're going to definitely pay more attention now, both as an exhibitor and as an event organizer. Build a year-round content and education platform. This is something that I think is the thing that event organizations, associations, anybody that's in the business that is presenting anything, this is where it is. This is really going to be the big one that's going to make the difference in the future of our events. Build a hybrid event model. I think that is a natural.
Well, I'm going to close things off there. With no further ado, I think what Paul has done is really put up a challenge there. And now I'd like to introduce Srinath Gopalakrishna, my long-term colleague and partner in crime on many publications in this area, to give his perspective from the academic standpoint. And then we'll when he's done, we'll get to Ian, and he'll debunk everything that we just heard. Okay, so with no further ado, let me turn things over to Srinath.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I guess I get to share my screen, or
you do.
Okay.
Looks good.
Can everybody see the?
Looks good. Looks good. Okay. We can see you. We can see the screen.
Okay, great. So again, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be connecting back with the ISBM members meeting, and to also sort of see a couple of old friends here on the screen. It's been a while, and I always enjoy the interactions we have with our practitioner audience. Clearly, the video gave you a little perspective on how practitioners are seeing it, and like Gary mentioned, we were kind of lucky in some ways to stumble into this area. But if I try to give you the academic perspective, just in terms of how academic and scholarly research came to happen, in this domain. Clearly, there's no argument about the fact that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, very, very significant in terms of, the relevance to the B2B communications and all that we do in the B2B domain. And yet, at some point, it was pretty clear that the academic research in this domain was very scant. And so, again, to cut a long story short, we were lucky and fortunate to come into contact at that point with a company called Exhibit Surveys, and that's the one that Ian represented at that point, and managed to be able to bring a lot of rigor and relevance to sort of this domain here in terms of research. And clearly the research began to grow as we were able to look both on the conceptual side and the empirical side. And as the research grew, there was also enablement with the technology that was evolving along with that at the same time. So we were able to get into some interesting new areas, and I'll talk a little bit about that from the context of what was happening, sort of looking back a little bit, and then looking at where we are right now, and a little bit of a peek into what might be the future lying ahead of us. So with that as the sort of the backdrop here, I think we call that the pre-technology area. By the way, there's a chapter that Gary and I and Ian or another PhD student here, they are working on a chapter in a handbook that's going to come out, the B2B handbook.
Yes, okay. But thank you, Srinath, for that. I forgot to put our plug in for the chapter. Stefan mentioned the handbook earlier, and one of the chapters will be on trade shows. So and again, send either me or Srinath an email if you'd like a pre-publication version of that, but it'll be available at the end of the year in print version. Okay, again, thanks for the plug.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So just to look back only for a little bit of a time, just a couple of minutes to look back on how all this evolved and what was happening in that pre-technology era, which we call it as like about 20 years before we hit the 2000, was basically the sense that when you bring rigor and some kind of a systematic study of this area, you can no longer talk about trade shows as saying, oh, I do these decisions based on gut feelings, or have this sense that you go to a trade show and you had a lot of crowd at your booth and you must have done well. You know, that was no longer going to be enough. Like Gary was mentioning, people were looking at some kind of a metric. There are some indicators, some metrics that we need to develop and put them to good use. So there was a lot of effort in that pre-technology era that I'm referring to here towards developing these metrics and trying to connect them to sort of bottom line measures like ROI. So for example, we would do things like a traffic flow model where you say how many attendees are at the show, but then look, all the attendees are not a part of your target audience. So that's a smaller subset. Then from the target audience, there is a smaller number that comes into your booth. And then there's an even smaller number that you actually convert into a lead or a sale eventually. So we developed these kind of metrics along the way and look at what were the drivers of those metrics. And so all that was connecting up with ROO, which is something like, return on objectives or return on investment. So we were able to do all of these as we were getting access to some data, like again, with tremendous support from ISBM and other companies that were helping us advance this domain. But the interesting thing in that era was that much of the questions that we were asking were mostly from the exhibitor side. So it was an exhibitor perspective that basically gave you the notion. Again, are we sharing the screen here? Okay.
Yep.
So
if you could put it in presentation mode, that would be good.
okay, 1 second.
Way down at the bottom, that little thing that looks like a screen in the lower bottom, or that mode. You're right there.
Is it good now?
Perfect.
Okay. So basically, like I was saying, it was mostly the exhibitor viewpoint. So that is sort of one actor in the game, one stakeholder in this platform that Gary was mentioning. And as we transition to the next 20 years or close to the current time that we are in, clearly there was a big push with technology. And trade shows were clearly setting up their websites. There was an event website to make things a little bit more efficient. And there was a lot of shift in power, so to speak, from the exhibitor side to the attendee side. The questions were more about, let's understand the attendees. Let us understand what they do at a show. Let's see how we can engage with them a little bit better. So all of the activities that the exhibitors and other show organizers were doing was to set up these event websites, try to do some presence on the social media to be able to leverage the power of, let's say, your networking, your social or other professional network, the word of mouth, the power of word of mouth. So they were trying to, leverage a lot of these areas, to gain benefits for the attendee and the show organizer and the exhibitor. And so as we would imagine, there was a lot of data that was beginning to become available with regard to tracking the attendee. So when you are at a show, people are tracking in terms of where you go, what you do, where do you spend your time. And that data was becoming available again in limited ways to the academic area. And we were able to do some interesting research along those lines as well. So clearly that was an evolution in terms of where the stakeholder perspective began to change. And now as we look at where we are at this point in time, you pretty much are looking at the notion that was even expressed in the video. Organizers are abandoned the live event. They went to the digital version. And with the trade show industry practically getting decimated, the questions actually were more like, hey, is this show going to happen? Is this show even going to survive? So the focus, interestingly, now has shifted to the third stakeholder, which is the show organizer. And how do you put together a show and how do you make it valuable to all the players in the game? And so again, as Ian will probably allude to as we go forward here, there are multiple dimensions of what the offering is. There is education, there is networking, there is commercial. And some of them are obviously a little bit better. The education can be a little bit better in the online format, but certainly, networking and concluding a sale is probably much better or easier in the in-person format. So these are all issues that are certainly on the table here. And it's not like we have all the answers at this point, but certainly some of the discussion that is emerging is, and that will inform how we in academia would like to look at how this field evolves going forward. The notion of the hybrid model, the fact that, the online is here to stay. And so when you look at a show organizer and the notion of a show being organized in the future, you say, well, there is hopefully some version of a traditional in-person live event that you're going to have. But to that, you may or may not, again, if you're a show organizer, you may or you may not want to add a virtual synchronous aspect as well, where some attendees who either are fearful or don't have the budget to travel or whatever would be willing to engage in a synchronous manner with the live event for certain times of the day or whatever they would like to choose. So there's a virtual synchronous component, presumably for a lower fee. You might say, it's not going to cost you as much to register for just a virtual engagement. You can have another element there, which is on demand, where you say, well, I can choose to watch this at whatever time I like. And that would be like maybe a special keynote speaker, maybe a special new product demo or an introduction. So you can actually record certain things and have them available on demand. And that would be in the asynchronous format, where you have the convenience to watch it whenever you want. And to that, you can add a fourth dimension, which is, the show organizer simply takes it on themselves to promote certain elements of the show to make it look like, wow, here's the CES. What a great thing we did. Here are some highlights of what we did at the show this year, and promote them on social media. And there are all various combinations of these that are certainly possible in what we call the hybrid model, which is probably going to get defined and refined as we go forward from here. So what it comes down to, I think, in the end, for academics, I think, again, is back to what we started with, which was sort of having these metrics. And now we will be talking about digital metrics, things like, how many registrants came on, how many people out of those registrants actually attended, what kind of engagement did they have, what were the post-event actions that they were able to do or they did, and can we track those things? So these are all some of the metrics that are going to be increasingly relevant as we continue to blend the online with the in-person going forward. And of course, the big question is going to be, how do we monetize all this, once we start putting them into play? And so I think at the end of the day, you look at this in a sort of a systematic way. You say there's a buyer that progresses through the funnel. We all know about the sales funnel, and you begin with a need, and then you end up eventually at a purchase and an upgrade and installation and so on. And as the buyer progresses through the various stages that you see on the left, the funnel, you can translate each of those steps or stages into what we would call communication tasks for the seller. So there is a lot of very direct one-to-one connections that you would engage with as a seller to engage in those tasks to be able to satisfy those progression steps in the left side. And then you connect them back, therefore, to the trade show. And again, I can take the last column that you see there called trade show communication effectiveness. I can start splitting that up further into the online and the in-person. So we can do a lot of these things going forward, but the effectiveness of the trade show, either in the online or in the in-person medium, can be medium high, medium low, whatever. So there are various levels at which these effectiveness varies. But like I said, the key challenges are going to remain, which is, what are the drivers of these important new metrics that we're going to develop in the digital world, or digital and in-person blended world? And how do these metrics then connect back to what we would call the bottom line that matters to everybody, which is the ROI or ROO, which is sort of the end of the day kind of metric. So there is a nice book that has just recently come out. A colleague of ours at the Wharton School, Jerry Wind, has co-authored a book with another colleague called Transformation in the Times of Crisis. And like I said, there is not everything that we know answers to at this point. There's a lot that we don't know. And we actually really hope that you will be partners with us as we go forward from here. And one of the things I would just hit the last bullet here, which is, it helps to try, maybe try and fail a little bit in the beginning, but we learn a lot when we try things. So it's about innovating. It's about jumping in and taking a shot at trying and testing something. Experimentation, which is a way in which you would learn about how something works, or whether it works or it doesn't work. So innovate and experiment, and that hopefully is our way to understand and learn how we can make this future that is ahead of us quite an exciting way in which we can make this a very, very relevant and important domain as it has been in the B2B marketing domain. So that's kind of what I had, Gary, just in terms of the academic perspective. I'm happy to, pipe in as needed as we go forward.
Okay, that's terrific. I want to make sure that we give Ian plenty of time, so I'm going to hold off. I got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you, but I want to hold off on that. I do want to make an additional pitch. You see the experiment. Well, it turns out that the academics on the that are associated with the ISBM, the Sales Excellence Institute, are well trained in trying to design experiments. And we would love to be your partners. If you're going in, if you're thinking about experimenting, you think about trying things, we are experts in experimentation. We are not experts in your business. We're experts in experimentation. Engage us or engage an academic in what you're doing in the design up front, not after you've done it, in the design up front, so that you can learn the most from the activities, and we as academics can build a deeper knowledge about what works and what doesn't work. Anyway, Srinath, thanks very much. If you can release the screen, we can turn things over to Ian.
Yeah.
Okay. If you can
Stop share.
Stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay. Ian, the floor is yours. How do we operate here? I think there's
yes.
something coming up.
And good morning, Gary, Srinath, and of course all the members. I do have to start off by saying that, in fact, it's been a real privilege to be associated with these two extremely smart guys, Gary and Srinath, for over 3 decades. They've been able to add a lot of the academic rigor to a lot of the work that we have done in the trade show space over the time. So thank you again for your participation and giving me some billing in all your high-profile papers and all. It's been a fun ride, and I hope it continues. So before we jump into the presentation, you all heard the Barron report, and certainly that was very much on target. But I will say that I'm a lot more bullish about the return to in-person fairly soon. Yes, it will look different. Some of the events will be smaller, but all of our data, which we have been tracking since April of last year, we've been doing pulse surveys on sentiment amongst attendees, exhibitors, brand marketers, organizers, and we've seen this really nice progression of sentiment, if you will, from initially quite positive because they didn't know what this whole COVID thing was all about, and everyone thought this would be a 1 and 2 month deal and be done. But as it started to dig in its heels, that's COVID, people got a lot more realistic, and sentiment wavered up and down. But now, with all the environmental factors and the vaccinations, et cetera, we are seeing a spike back up, and you'll see that all in the data. So I have a lot of data to share, which I'll be doing shortly. And clearly we don't have enough time. I would love to be able to spend half a day with everyone and have a great discussion. But do include your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So let's start off with just a second. I want to share my. Okay, is that a better view? Yeah. All right. Okay, as I mentioned, one of the things we've been doing is tracking these surveys and sentiment since in April, May of last year. And the results I'm actually going to share with you this morning is from our most recent wave, which is wave 7. And that was just completed in April. So it's really very, very current data. And I couldn't start without giving you a profile, given the audience and given who I'm associated with. So as you can see, we've got a huge response here. And more importantly, our margin of error in both the attendee survey results as well as the exhibitor survey results is very, very small. So So what you can expect is a whole lot of stability in the data that you're going to be seeing. Amongst amongst the attendee results, you see that 13% international. The reason that's important is not only because it's providing this representation of people who come to shows, but there is a weakness in that segment of the audience. And my recommendations to show organizers have been that as you are projecting out attendance for your shows late summer, fall, winter, that's where you might want to take more of a hit in your numbers, because we are seeing a weaker return to events, much stronger here in the US. And as you can see what's going on in other parts of the world right now, it sort of all makes sense. So some high level findings here, and we'll go into some detail. Confidence, certainly, and optimism is at an all-time high. And I expect that when we do the next wave, which we are planning to do at least one more, if not two, the next wave will likely be the middle of June or so. I'm expecting that to be even stronger. So that's certainly good news. Time frame to return to events has also shifted upwards. It's been accelerated. I'm not going to give away the actual time frame, because I know we're going to have some poll questions, which, Lori, right after the slide, I'm going to have you run those poll questions so that everyone can note down their responses. And then we get into the data, we can see how we've aligned. Virtual, and you heard this in the Barron report, virtual will very much be a part of our integrated future. The jury is still out, though, as to the extent of it. So, for most of you who participate in events, either as an attendee or an exhibitor, there's been some element of virtual that's existed way before COVID. They have been online, they've been on-demand sessions, certainly in healthcare, but even in other industries. So I will say that given all the investment that has happened over this past year in virtual platforms and technology, I can't imagine this will all be thrown by the wayside. We are going to see a continuation of some aspect of virtual. But I do believe that in-person is going to return. It'll take maybe a few years to ramp up to where it was. But our data is showing that over 80%, whether you're an attendee or an exhibitor, feel that in-person events are irreplaceable. That, in fact, was the statement. So I think we are in a good trajectory where that's concerned for all of us who want to get back to in-person, who have a vested interest in in-person. And even from the commerce side, we know that that's what really works. It's that whole in-person. As far as communications are concerned, particularly for events that are ramping up late summer and in the fall, we are kind of at that spot right now. You will see later on that the 4 to 5 month window is where exhibitors in particular want to be notified and be given all the information, not only about a go, no-go decision about the event itself, but also what are you going to be doing about health and safety, what's the event going to look like, what's the safety protocols in meeting rooms, all of those factors that they're going to be considering in their participation. So again, that's so let's share some of the attendee results. So the positive sentiment, and I mentioned to you this is wave 7. Well, I didn't want to show all of that data because it would get very, very messy, very busy. So you're probably going to see 2 and 3 waves in most of the slides. But look at the uptick from February to April in terms of positive sentiment. This is an open-ended question. We don't ask them, is it positive, negative, or neutral, but they're classified in those categories. And while the word cautious has been consistent from when we first started measuring, we are now starting to see words like excited and eager and hope and ready all of these come to the forefront, which again, I think is supporting that whole sentiment of being bullish towards returning to in-person events, and a good decline in negative sentiment, which is really what we want to see. Confidence index, this is an algorithm we developed, which is merely taking two of the questions. One is the likelihood to return to events, which you'll see the results, and then the when. And taking those two and then combining them and coming up with an algorithm on a scale of 0 to 1. Right now, we've always said that you want to be a 0.8 or higher to be really confident about sentiment. And we are there now. We are at 0.81. So I'm going to take a pause. Lori, are you able to run the poll questions right now? Okay, wonderful. So if everyone can put in your answers for 1 and 2, and then Lori will also run 3 and 4.
We're going to give it a few minutes to get to around 80%.
All right, wonderful.
They're still coming in rather quickly, so we'll give it a few more seconds here. Still clicking. We appreciate you all participating. Okay, Lori, that looks like we've hit steady there. So save that, don't show the answers, but then go to the third and fourth poll, Ian.
Yes.
Okay.
We were debating whether it's 4 polls or whether it's 2 polls with 2 questions each. Regardless, it's 4 questions.
All right. So Lori's queuing up the next one. There we go. You may need to scroll to see all the answers for the second one there. Took a minute for everybody to figure out what that first question was. Now they're all at it. All right, we'll wait for the same response rate. Maybe one more. All right, Lori, it looks like we've got everybody there. Okay.
All right, wonderful. And we'll be sharing the results shortly. So let's look at the likelihood of going back to events. Again, we've seen a steady increase. The last wave, 84% are highly likely. Those are the people who gave an 8, 9, or 10 rating to go back to events. Once the virus or once COVID is under control, certainly under control, it has a different meaning to different people. But if you see what's going on, at least here in the US, we are certainly seeing a positive sign in terms of controlling COVID. And do they have enough reliable information? So this was really interesting, because as much of information as we all have access to, until February, less than half of the attendees to shows felt they just didn't have enough information to make a decision to attend. A huge jump in April, those who felt that now they do have enough information, but we wanted to dig deeper into that 36% you see who said they didn't have enough information and find out what is it that they are lacking. And essentially it was, they were not sure about the direction that COVID would take. It seemed like we would stabilizing, then we would go up, then it would stabilize. So where are we now? And I think that there was a lot of uncertainty about that, about the variants, other people not being vaccinated, reaching herd immunity, all the things we are probably in most of our conversations. And then Clearly, they wanted to know what events were doing in terms of the facility, in terms of the city, what's happening with city regulations. So that made up the uncertainty, that's 36% you're seeing. I have a feeling that that's going to go down in the next wave, particularly as cities and venues come up with their with all of their guidelines. Okay, let's get the results of poll 1. So questions 1 and 2 before I share the actual data. I thought we would just have a little fun with this. Okay, so when will trade show attendees return to events? 44% said fall, 15% summer, okay. And the cautious folk were spring 2022. What percent of attendees will return in the fall? Okay, most said 50%, then 75%. Okay, let's, we'll be getting to those results shortly. All right, so here's the time frame. So the correct answer for the when will they return is 75% will return in the fall. So as you can see, it's greatly accelerated. That was the comment I made earlier from the previous wave. But I think the more important number, while 75 is great, we see that happening in the fall, and we really are all very bullish about the fall, at least those of us who participate in shows, attend shows. But I liked to see that 41% in the summer. That means we are getting a runway. We are getting a ramp up even before we get to fall. And you're already seeing some events come back on in person. We have a big one slated for June in Las Vegas, which is the big World of Concrete show, big equipment. Some of you may be familiar with it. And all eyes are on that event to see how they pull it off, what kind of attendance they get. Will there be any outbreaks of COVID from it? So in one sense, it's a big test case. When you get to, by the time you get to winter in December, January, you've got most of the audience ready to go back to events. So very encouraging sign. You look at travel restrictions, pretty much 74% will have no travel restrictions by the fall. And that goes to 80% if you add in winter. You can see even the don't know category is dropping ever so slightly because attendees are getting more clarity from their organizations in terms of what's happening with our travel policy, who's allowed to travel, where are we allowed to travel, for what reasons are we allowed to travel. So I'm expecting a lot of that will change in the next few months. But look at how the numbers are starting to triangulate. You saw the 75% of those who are going back in the fall, roughly the same number, 74% will have travel restrictions lifted. And you're going to see some other numbers that are in that same neighborhood, which is giving us a great deal of confidence. And that's been my recommendation to organizers, that if you were to project today based on the data that you have available, and it's only likely to go up if everything else stays the same, I would be projecting attendance to be roughly in that 70-75% range of what they have been used to before for the in-person events.
Ian, we've had a couple of questions come into chat. One of them is this, how global is this data, or what regions are we looking at? Who are we asking these questions of?
Okay, very good question. And on the first slide, I showed you, so I would say that it is mostly US focused. You saw that 13% of the attendees were international respondents. And my comment about that, it is a little weaker on that side. So if I was to say for projectability in terms of these numbers, it would be US and North America projectability.
And do you have some insight about the level of investment at companies? So it's one thing to say, sure, you can get a plane ticket and go to a show. It's another to say, I'm going to spend, $500,000 on a show booth. Do you have any sense of how much investment companies?
Well, we don't have any dollars because, as you might imagine, that kind of information is not the easiest to get.
Yeah.
From exhibitors. But I will say, based on organizations that we do work with, the purse strings are opening up. There is caution, but I am seeing budgets being relaxed. And now a lot is going to depend on how successful some of the events that are opening up are going to be. But I am seeing some positive signs there. Unfortunately, I can't give you a dollar number, but I do see positive signs there.
It seems like it might be that chicken and egg thing. If there's enough people coming, then there'll be a large spend on booth space. And if they don't think anyone's coming, then no one's going to show, right? So
yeah.
Yeah.
Lori, can we run the results of the next, or maybe let's run the results of the next poll?
Sure.
Okay, so most of you said, and it wasn't intended to be a trick question, but you've all seen numbers of vaccination rates in the general population. This was specifically trade show attendees that I was asking about. And we would expect that our trade show attendees would be vaccinated at a slightly higher rate. So most of you have said the 64%, and you will see the correct answer in a minute. The next one is how many hours do trade show attendees spend at virtual online event? And most of you between 2.5 and 3.8. I will make an interesting comment here, because while that is not the correct answer based on the data, the data is the 7.2. I do believe that the number is actually lower. I don't believe it's as low as 2.5, but it is actually lower because I think people are including a lot of their virtual time when they're not actually engaging with content. So they might have logged into the event, but they're not actually engaging. And so we get a more inflated number. So most of you who have said the 2.5 and the 3.8, when we look at actual behavior on platforms, because we have our own platform, it's closer towards the 5-hour mark. So not quite as high as the data is showing, but not quite as low as the 2.5 and 3 hours as well. All right, let's close out that and move on to the, so there's the 79% who are vaccinated, almost half already vaccinated, and another 31% will be soon and might be already by the time we do the next wave. So there's that steady 15, 17% who do not plan to get vaccinated, but that's even going down. And let's see what the next wave, we all know that we are going to hit a wall. And whether the wall is that 15% or it's lower at 10, we'll see. The important thing is that most of them have said that when they are vaccinated, it really boosts their confidence to return to in-person events. And that's what we are looking for, that 88%. All right. I thought, given that many of you are exhibitors who participate at events, I want to share a few quick results of how some of your peers are responding to the survey and what their sentiment is as well. So when you look at positivity, not quite as high as what you saw amongst attendees. So the exhibitor base is definitely more cautious. You can see the word cautious a lot bigger. But there's the hesitant, they are hesitant as well. They're frustrated, nervous, but you do have excited, ready, good words as well showing up. So I do feel that the sentiment is still a little more negative amongst exhibitors, and this varies by sector. So if you're in the manufacturing sector, if you're in the retail sector as an exhibitor, these numbers look very different. They're ready to get back to events. Sentiment is a lot more positive. The likelihood of attending events, though, is high. And no surprise there. I mean, it's only a few points below attendees, because these are all exhibitors. These are people who rely on events for their commerce. So no surprise for that 80%. Have enough reliable information to make an exhibiting decision. Again, huge jump there, which is a good sign, because you want to make sure, particularly if you're an organizer, you want to make sure that you are communicating regularly, but more importantly, effectively. Now you see a higher number, that 46% of exhibitors feel they do not have enough information. And what is it that is lacking for them? They're also concerned about COVID and the status and vaccinations and all of that, but they also need event data. What's happening in the city? What's happening with the event? How are the meeting rooms going to look? All the health and safety information around that, cancellation clauses. So very show-specific information they are looking for, and that's why the advice is to the organizer to communicate early and effectively. So here's the time frame for exhibitors. And as you can see, this is the first time that the fall time frame has lined up exactly. 75% of exhibitors are returning in fall. The ramp up in summer is also very similar. So again, you've got to think, when you look at results like this, that there is definitely optimism, there's definitely confidence, and we are hoping that the ramp up to the end of summer, early fall will in fact be very strong, and we are not hit with anything that that's unexpected.
We have another question for you, Ian. This
Yeah.
is interesting. So
Yeah.
did any of your research uncover any sentiment on the virtual event experience? So the wonder is some of the optimism to return to in-person because the results with the virtual events was so poor. At their
Yes.
company, they had very, very bad experiences with the shows that were virtual.
Oh yes, and I've got actually a lot of data on that side, but we really couldn't accommodate all of that. But I will share this. If you recall, I mentioned a stat earlier on about the 80+% who said in-person are replaceable, and of course we were asking with virtual. We know from our measurement and data that virtual, when it comes to meeting goals for both, not only exhibitors now, for both attendees and exhibitors, is very, very low. It is basically not meeting goals. It's roughly in the 20% for attendees, and even lower, about 12, 13, 14% for exhibitors in terms of meeting goals. So when it comes to commerce, when it comes to ROI, that part, there's a huge gap there. From the healthcare sector now, content is working. Now we know that content works well in the virtual world, and a lot of the healthcare meetings, the content side, the scientific sessions are a big part of their meetings. So that works well. For most of the rest of the types of meetings, it is all about virtual. So those who have had bad experiences, whether it be about the technology, yes, the data has supported that. We've seen some technology glitches. We've seen not being able to connect with attendees, matchmaking not working, all of those things. I will say between last April and today, and I've attended a lot of virtual events, things have gotten better. Are we there yet? No. Will we ever get there? I'm not sure. And then it all depends on how much influence and investment organizers are going to put into the virtual space once we get back to in-person. It's a bit of a long answer, but basically I'm agreeing with those who have not had good experiences. And I will say, in fairness to some events that have had a good experience, it has been a checkerboard, but it's sort of, it's leaning towards a less than optimal experience. Travel bans, again, most exhibitors will have their travel bans also lifted by fall and winter. Communications. For those of you who are on this call, the data is showing, and this is coming from exhibitors, roughly a 5-month window is when you want to hear about what's happening with the event and all the important details. You can see there are people that go above the 5-month point, but right now that's kind of what we are seeing. So really quickly, I'd like to wrap up here because I know we are a little over time, and Gary has actually been kind and not signaled to me or said anything. But if you look at the now, near, and next, so now where do we go from here? What are we doing? So we are in the now, where virtual is very strong because that's the only option we have. Some in-persons are coming back. Many are planning for hybrid. You've heard the term hybrid. The challenges with hybrid, of course, certainly cost. And then it's, what do I put up virtually versus what do I have in person? And by that, I mean, we all know that content works virtually, but what content goes online so that people who attend in person don't feel that, hey, I could have stayed home and gotten the same experience. I don't think they will, because we all know that the experience is very different when you're in person, but events are trying to figure that all out. We will return from the data to larger in-person events by the fall. Will they look a little different? Yes, they will. There'll be all these protocols that might have to be put into place. By then, they may be a little more relaxed than they are right now. And I do believe that virtual will, some component of it, albeit smaller than what we see now, will stick around, because we have all learned a lot of efficiencies in this past year. Business travel, particularly when it comes to inter-office and those kinds of meetings, I can't imagine that we would still have them at that same level as we used to before, because we've all figured out that even though we may be Zoom fatigued, we've all figured out that we can do this via Zoom and certain things can be accomplished. But events, we are all looking to get back in person. And right now, the data supports that and is very positive. So I'm going to stop here and happy to have a discussion, take questions, and
Well,
that's
pretty much up to Lynn. But let me just ask one or two things. Maybe again, I know we're running a couple of minutes late. If I understand correctly, what you've reported here is that so far, education is working fine. In fact, in many ways, it's better at the at virtual. Virtual has been miserable in terms of commerce, and it's also been miserable in terms of networking.
Networking, yeah.
And we're all starved for that. Okay, so my sense is, and it's going to differ depending on people's risk profiles, et cetera. And I want to also then cycle back to what the way Srinath ended, which is that we need experiments, because I think the thing that's behind everyone's minds here is who's got this thing locked up, who's got the hybrid model locked up, is doing really well. Do you have any exemplars that you could point to of a firm that's a firm or a show that's really done it well?
Well, first of all, hybrid is only now taking shape. So no, I don't know of any one that has killed it, so to speak. I think when we get later in the year, when we get to September and October, which is when most events, the larger events at least, are going to have hybrid, we will get a better sense of who's doing it well and who isn't. And more importantly, what does that really look like? Because right now the debate is not so much, most are having hybrid, but the debate is also about, should the virtual be before the in-person? Should it be after the in-person? Should it be at the same time? How do people manage that when it's at the same time? do we even have resources to pull it off? Because you almost need two sets of staff, one to run the hybrid, the virtual, and one to run the in-person.
Yeah.
And nobody has that right now.
Yeah.
So there are all those challenges as well. So, so the jury is very much out on that.
Okay, thank you for that. Also, we are going to continue to stay in touch with Ian and people in the industry, Srinath and I, so that we can monitor the experiments that are going on, you know, across companies. Because I think, you know, I think that his point is well taken, that we're far too early on this to find out what's working and what's not working. So it's really, we academics will be sitting on the sideline and trying to figure that out. I want to close here, but also note that the report that Ian is referring to, the complete version of that will be posted on Pulse. Okay, so that ISBM members can have access to the complete data, complete findings. And with that, I want to thank Ian.
Gary, before you close, just one more time, maybe we can just say this, which is the invitation to partner with us as we seek to develop new knowledge in this area would be welcome. All right, it's open to all the ISBM member companies, and please reach out to us. You know, we are delighted to work with you and sometimes customize it to your needs and work it out in a way that will help you know, you navigate this road ahead.
Yeah, some of my academic colleagues say the same thing. We consult for data.
Right.
Yeah, that's
All right.
great.
Okay, thanks, Srinath. Thanks, Ian. Let me turn things back over to Lynn.
Yeah,
right,
that's great. And if you guys have more questions for these folks, feel free to put it in the chat, even during the break. We'll get back to them and get those answers to you. And if there's something bigger than that, we'll speak to it at the next segment. This was really enlightening. And I think, you know, all of us have questions about what we want to spend money on and spend time on and spend travel on. So thanks for this. And I do encourage our member companies, if they're planning to do a show or attend a show and they want to get some insights, to give you guys a ring and hopefully share back some data too. Thanks again, guys. So we are going to reconvene at noon for our next presentation. Feel free to grab yourself some lunch. That's noon Eastern time, early lunch for those of you that are on some other part of the country, or another coffee. And again, thanks a lot, Gary, Ian, Srinath. That was fabulous. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Okay, bye.